Good day, students. In our last topic, we talked about the state and its different elements, nation, and how globalization affects our country. And as we reach the half of our topic in Philippine politics and governance, we are going to tackle one of the most important features of this subject, the historical background of Philippine politics and the formation of our 1987 Constitution. Present-day Philippine politics is a product of a long history influenced by colonialism and nationhood. Governance was first embodied by the emergence of pre-colonial barangays and the Muslim sultanates in Mindanao. The political growth of native Filipinos was cut short by the arrival of Westerners and imposed a colonial rule here in the country. Nationalism became the inspiration of propaganda movement and Philippine Revolution. Independence took place but was interrupted by the arrival of Americans and establishment of a new colonial rule with a transition to democratic form. Japanese came in World War II and again, the country was colonized. After the war, we gained independence and formed a republic. We continue to face challenges as we move towards a more refined governance in our country. Let's go into the details to fully understand our history. In the present-day society, history is one of the most ignored subjects. That is why it is understandable that we, the Filipinos, have many misconceptions about our background. One of this misconception was there was no politics in the Philippines prior to colonization period. We have a very little understanding on how the pre-colonial society works, and facts about our ancestors was not taught in detail in our educational system. Another thing is that the Filipinos in our society today thinks that every problem or issue that we encounter in politics and governance was caused by colonization. We are going to correct these misconceptions on today's lesson. In the pre-colonial Philippines, barangay is the basic political used by our ancestors. It is an independent polity or a political entity, and authority is exercised within a defined territory. These barangays also interacted with their neighboring communities, building political military alliances through intermarriages and barter system, exchange of services and goods. It is often led by a datu, who rose to the position either by birth or valor. In these times, women were highly regarded as they have the opportunity to become the datu or chieftain. These chieftains, or datu as we call them, have specified roles within their society. First, they are the one who implements their customary laws in their community. Second, they serve as the commander-in-chief during wars. Lastly, they are also responsible for the livelihood of his or her people, and the barangay's collective wealth. Now, let me give you some obscure facts about our forefathers. During the pre-colonial period, women enjoyed the same status with men. They were entitled to property, engage in trade, and exercise their right to divorce their husbands. They could also serve as a chieftain in absence of a male heir. Women could also attain statuses like medicine women, or high priestess, also known as babalan. Another not widely known fact about our ancestors was, they have smooth relations to our foreign neighbors such as Arabs and Chinese. They exchanged their goods and established trade relations. Another political system that existed during our pre-colonial years was the Sultanate. This particular system was established in Sulu and Maguindanao by Abu Bakr, a Muslim missionary, and the very first Sultan of Sulu. The lineage of these people could be traced back from the bloodlines of the earliest Arab missionaries like Abu Bakr himself. The Sultanate is a centralized type of government, in which the barangays in Sulu and Maguindanao was united in a single kingdom or sultanate. The sultanates view the sultan as their foremost leader. Under him, several datus administered the barangay in his domain. The political legitimacy in these sultanates was based on blood and religious ties. The members of the sultanate considered themselves as a member of a vast political community bound by their faith. Their governance, therefore, was defined religious traditions and Sharia law. Let's now discuss the next political events in the Philippine history, which is the Spanish colonial period. Renaissance is known as the period of cultura, an intellectual rebirth in Europe around 14th century. It introduced the desire for exploration, acquisition of knowledge, and discovery among Europeans. This gave way to the Age of Discovery, which resulted to conflicts between the countries, claiming for territories and trade routes. One of the major competitors on the early parts of European explorations was the Kingdom of Spain. Funded by the kingdom, it attracted many explorers, and established many colonies under the Spanish crown. The explorers sailing in Spain's name makes it a goal to convert the colonized territories into Catholicism. The kingdom also wants to gain the control of the blooming spice trade in Asia. One of the explorers, funded by Spain, was Ferdinand Magellan. He was a Portuguese explorer who sailed under the banner of Spain, after King Manuel of Portugal rejected his proposal of expeditions to the Spice Islands. King Charles I, the King of Spain, accepted his proposed western route to reach the famous Spice Island, and gave him 5 boats, namely Trinidad, San Antonio, Victoria, Conception, and Santiago, with 270 men as his companions. In September 1519, Magellan and his men left from Spain, and started their expedition by using a westward route that was never traveled before. They reached the tip of South America and discovered a strait, which is named after him today, as a doorway to the Pacific. He first reached the island of Guam, and continued his travel towards the Spice Islands. Magellan's fleet then sailed to Philippine archipelago, and befriended the locals. Ferdinand Magellan met his end on April 27, 1521, when he was shot by a poison arrow in the Battle of Mactan. 44 years after the initial meeting of Spaniards and Filipinos, the Spain colonized the country after Miguel López de Legazpi established a permanent settlement in Cebu, and conquered Manila in 1565. After colonizing the country, Spain introduced our ancestors to reduction. In this, local inhabitants were relocated into towns or pueblos. These pueblos were modeled after European towns. In the first few decades of colonial rule, Spaniards introduced the European-style feudal system. They divided the colonized territories into districts, called as encomienda. They were distributed to the feudal lords, or encomenderos, and tasked to establish political authority in the natives. The encomienda system was put to an end after the local towns were organized into provinces or alcaldías. The alcaldías paved way to the creation of the provincial government. In the structure of Spanish colonial government, the Governor-General serves as the highest official. He was appointed by the King of Spain, and serves as his representative in the country. He had the power to assign officials into various government positions, and in charge of Real Audiencia, the judiciary body in the country. Meanwhile, the provinces are ruled by Alcalde Mayor. He was in charge of tax collection, and disciplining ineffective public officials. On the other hand, Gobernadorcillos rules the towns or pueblos. They are bound to aid the parish priests in everything pertaining to worship, and the observance of religious laws. They are also in charge of building public infrastructures in his town. Lastly, we have the Cabeza de Barangay. He is one who rules the barangay. They were in charge of local defense and security. Each cabeza was exempted from tribute payment and forced labor, known as Polo y Servicios. On January 20, 1972, 200 Filipinos employed in Cavite Arsenal staged a revolt against the Spanish government. It led to the execution of secular priests Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, collectively called as Gomberza, as they tagged as mastermind of the said mutiny. The execution of Gomberza in 1872 brought a big change in the idea of nationalism of the country, and gave way to the birth of new breed of reformist, led by Jose Rizal, Graciano Lopez Hina, Mariano Ponce, and Marcelo H. del Pilar. The propaganda movement was a significant development in Philippine nationhood, as the propagandist envisioned changes, not for just certain communities but for the entire nation. Together with other propagandists, Jose Rizal worked to spread nationalist ideas, and directly campaigned for reforms from the Spanish government. They run La Solidaridad, a newspaper that disseminates their ideas and views regarding the Spanish colonization in the country. The propagandists consist mainly of ilustrados, or middle-class Filipinos that have studied and traveled in Europe, presented their reforms before the Spanish government. These are the following. 1. Philippines to be recognized as a province of Spain. 2. Filipino representation in the Spanish Cortes, or the Spanish legislative body. 3. Secularization of all parishes in the Philippines. 4. Implementation of social reforms. Upon his return to the Philippines, Jose Rizal established the La Liga Filipina, a civic and reform group on July 3, 1892 in Tonda, Manila. This would be proven as short-lived, because on July 6, 1892, Rizal was captured by the Spanish authorities, and was deported to the Pitan. Its members tried to continue the activities inside the organization, but went inactive after some time. The members were divided into two. The conservatives that continued to provide funds for La Solidaridad, and the radicals who believed that peaceful negotiations will not give them what they want, and they became the founding members of Katipunan. The objectives of La Liga Filipina are as follows. First, to encourage reforms in the country. Second, to call the government peacefully to end abuses and injustices, and lastly, to bring unity among Filipinos. After Rizal's exile to the Pitan, some members of Liga reconvened to form a secret revolutionary organization, the KKK. Unlike the previous reform and propaganda movement, the Katipunan advocated complete independence from Spain through an armed revolution. The founders of Katipunan includes Deodato Arellano, Ladislao Diwa, and Andres Bonifacio. Gat Andres Bonifacio founded the Katipunan on July 7, 1892 on a radical platform to secure independence by force. The Katipunan was founded from the principles of La Liga Filipina. The national ideology of the Katipunan was formulated by Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Jacinto. His concept of nationhood is based on ethnic roots. He coined the term Katagalugan to refer to the nation composed of all Filipino people, not just Tagalogs. Katagalugan includes all communities and groups that aspire to fight for their independence from Spain. Emilio Jacinto's Cartilla ng Katipunan enumerated the guiding principles of the organization's members. It highlighted civic virtues and values that can contribute to nationhood. On August 19, 1895, Teodoro Padinio exposed the organization to Father Mariano Hill, a Spanish friar. The Guardia Civil started to arrest some prominent members, and convicted on charges of illegal possession and treason. This would lead to the breakout of the revolution, with Katipuneros meeting in the yards of Melchora Aquino, and tearing their cedalas, marked the start of armed uprising against the colonizers. In the following days, Governor-General Camilo de Palavija declared martial law in Manila together with the provinces of Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, Bulacan, Pampanga, Tarlac, and Nueva Ecija. The Katipunan in Cavite was divided into two factions. The Magdiwang led by Mariano Alvarez, and the Magdalo, led by Baldomero Aguinaldo. Cavite province became the center of the revolution, as the battles started shifting to them. In order to reorganize and establish a united front against the Spanish authorities, they held a convention in Tijeros. They invited Andres Bonifacio to preside, and the organization decided to dissolve Katipunan, to be replaced by a revolutionary government. It was followed by an election, in which Aguinaldo won as the president. Meanwhile, Andres Bonifacio won as the Director for Interior. Daniel Tirona, a Magdalo member, questioned Bonifacio's credentials, and he stated that the latter was unfit for the position. Bonifacio was offended, and he declared that the election that day was null and void. Andres Bonifacio and his men organized a separate government through Naik Pact. Aguinaldo and his supporters considered this as a treason, and moved to arrest him. Andres Bonifacio and his brother, Procopio, was arrested on April 27, 1897, and found guilty by the Aguinaldo's military court. They were executed on May 10, 1897 in Maragondan, Cavite. The death of Bonifacio marked as the end of Katipunan. After the dissolution of Katipunan, a revolutionary government was founded, with Emilio Aguinaldo as the president. After the Spanish counter-offensive in Cavite, revolutionary forces were forced to evacuate to the mountains of Biyaknabato, Bulacan. A charter based in the Cuban Constitution was also drafted, and it is considered as the first formal constitution drafted in the Philippines. The main goal of Biyaknabato Republic was to separate from Spanish monarchy and establish a Philippine republic. The new constitution also outlined certain basic human rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the right to education. Pedro Paterno, a Spanish-born in the Philippines, volunteered to act as mediator between Aguinaldo and Governor Primo de Rivera, to put an end to the battles. On December 15, 1897, the pact was signed, and Aguinaldo with some of his men went to voluntary exile in Hong Kong. The signing of the Pact of Biyaknabato ended the hostilities between the Filipinos and Spaniards. But this truce didn't last. Both sides violated their terms of agreement. As the Spanish-American War emerged, the Philippines became one of the battlegrounds. As the Philippines is under the Spanish rule, the Americans brought the war in the Philippines. This was used by General Emilio Aguinaldo to continue the pursuit of independence for the country. After his voluntary exile in Hong Kong, Emilio Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines and revived the revolution. Aguinaldo then established a dictatorial government on May 24, 1898. The dictatorial government was short-lived, as a new government will be established at the end of the war with Spain. On June 12, 1898, the Philippine independence was proclaimed at Cavite, the hometown of President Emilio Aguinaldo. After a few days, the dictatorial government was abolished. After the abolishment of dictatorial government, Emilio Aguinaldo established a revolutionary government that aims to struggle for the country's independence, and prepare for a real republic. In September 1898, Aguinaldo called the delegates from different provinces together, as Revolutionary Congress in Malolos, Bulacan. The Malolos Congress was inaugurated on September 15, 1898, and began the task of passing laws that would establish an independent Philippine government. They ratified the Declaration of Independence held in Cavite and formally inaugurated Emilio Aguinaldo as the President of the Philippines. The delegates on Malolo's Congress then decided to form a constitution to secure the legitimacy of Aguinaldo's government. The final version of Malolo's Congress was inaugurated on January 21, 1899, and paved way to the formation of the First Philippine Republic. The Treaty of Paris of 1898 was treaty signed by Spain and United States on December 10, 1898 that ended the Spanish-American War. As a result, the Philippines was annexed to United States as one of its colonies. This resulted to the Philippine-American War. After a few years of Filipino resistance, President Emilio Aguinaldo was captured in Isabela on March 23, 1901. He took an oath of allegiance to the United States in April 23, 1901, formally ending the First Philippine Republic and recognizing the sovereignty of U.S. in our country. After the Battle of Manila, the Americans established a military government, with General Wesley Merritt acting as the military governor. During this time, the U.S. military governor governed the Philippines under the authority of U.S. President. In order to study the political conditions of the Philippines, the United States government decided to send delegates. 2 commissions were sent, and this gave way to the transition of Philippine government into democratic one. The United States sent the First Philippine Commission on 1899, which was headed by Jacob Sherman. The commission proclaimed the intentions of the U.S. in the Philippines, and assured the Filipinos that they intend to help our development, not to exploit our country. The Second Philippine Commission was established in 1900s, and headed by William Howard Taft. They took both the executive and legislative tasks of the colonial government in the Philippines. The commission also acquired the services of Filipino elites as politicians and lawmakers. As for the judiciary, the Supreme Court was also reorganized and appointed Cayetano Arellano as the first Chief Justice. In 1916, the Philippine Autonomy Law, or Jones Law, was passed. It provided the changes in the civil government in anticipation of eventual independence. This law also abolished the Philippine Commission, and made significant changes in executive and legislative branches of the government. In 1918, the Philippine legislature started sending an independence commission in the U.S. The last one, Oz Rock's mission, led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Roxas, lobbied for the passing of Herjav's Law, or the Philippine Independence Act of 1933. This law set a 10-year preparatory period for the Philippine independence. It is soon rejected after the passing of Tydings-McDuffie Law. Manuel Luis Quezon soon secured the Tydings-McDuffie Law, or Philippine Independence Act of 1934. It is no different from the previous one, except for the provision about the American bases in the country, from military to naval bases only. It is ratified on May 1, 1934, and they convened for another constitutional assembly that gave way to the Commonwealth government. They held a general election on September 16, 1935, with Manuel Quezon and Sergio Osmeña winning as the president and vice president. They are inaugurated in November 15, 1935, and the Commonwealth government would operate until July 4, 1946.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian.